My boss, the CEO, took credit for my work until my secret revenge destroyed his empire, and tonight, I'm showing you the blood on the keyboard. George thinks I'm in the break room fetching him sparkling water to celebrate his $50 million breakthrough. He doesn't realize that while he was rehearsing his visionary speech, I was burying a logic bomb in the company's core that will turn his entire life into a 404 error by midnight. But I just found a file on his private server. I'm trapped on the 40th floor, the FBI is breaching the lobby, and George just sent his fixer to make sure I don't hit the enter key. If you've ever been the shadow that built someone else's throne, hit subscribe right now because the shadow is tired of hiding. Do I make it out with the truth, or does George finish what he started? They say that in California, the sun shines on everyone. But if you work in Silicon Valley, you know that's a lie. The sun only shines on the people at the top of the glass towers. For the rest of us, the ones in the basements, the ones with the bleary eyes and the caffeine-stained desks, we live in the shadows. My name is Patricia. And for 6 years, I have been the shadow of George Vane. If you've seen a magazine cover in the last year, you've seen George. He has that perfect salt and pepper hair, the tailored Italian suits, and that smile, that $50 million smile that tells the world he's the smartest man in any room he enters. He calls himself a visionary. The media calls him the architect of the future. But I know the truth. George couldn't code a basic Hello World program if his life depended on it. I am the one who built Aura Tech. Every line of code, every recursive algorithm, every breakthrough in our Sun Phoenix AI, it all came from my fingers. I spent my birthdays in front of a dual-monitor setup while George was in street tropes. I spent my Christmas Eves debugging kernels while George was hosting galas with Martins and Robert, bragging about his latest innovations. I didn't mind it at first. I was young. I was grateful for the opportunity. I actually believed him when he sat me down in his office, leaned in close enough that I could smell his expensive cologne and whispered, "Patricia, you're the heart of this company. We're a team. Without you, there is no George Vane." What a fool I was. I mistook his exploitation for mentorship. I mistook his dependence for love. The change happened 6 months ago. The air in the office got colder. George stopped asking for my input and started demanding my results. He brought in Andre and Denzel, 2 consultants who looked more like bodyguards than tech experts. He started locking his office door. And then came the morning of the merger. The sun was hitting the 40th floor windows of our Palo Alto headquarters. It was a beautiful day for a betrayal. I was standing in the corner of the boardroom, holding a stack of tablets, waiting to be introduced as the lead developer. I had my speech ready. I wanted to talk about the neural mapping I'd spent 3 years perfecting. George stood up. He didn't look at me. He looked at Martins and Robert, the 2 biggest venture capitalists in the state. "Gentlemen," George said, his voice booming with a confidence. "I'm proud to announce that after 18 months of solitary work in my private lab, I have finally cracked the encryption barrier. Sun Phoenix is complete. And I did it entirely on my own." The room went cold. My heart didn't just break, it shattered into a million jagged pieces of ice. I looked at Jane and Mary, the office assistants, who were standing by the door. They looked at the floor. They knew. Everyone knew. But no one said a word. George turned to me then. For a second, I thought I saw a flash of guilt in his eyes. But it was gone as quickly as a glitch in a system. "Patricia," he said, using that patronizing tone he usually reserved for newly employed. "Be a sweetheart and go fetch the revised contracts from Laura in legal? And while you're at it, we're going to need more sparkling water. We have a lot of celebrating to do." I walked out of that room, through the glass doors and straight into the bathroom. I locked the stall, sat on the floor, and I cried. I cried for the 6 years I'd wasted. I cried for the nights I'd forgotten to eat because I was finishing his work. But then, I stopped. I wiped my face. I looked at my reflection in the chrome of the hand dryer. I realized something. George thinks he's the king because he owns the castle. But he forgot one very important thing. I'm the one who built the secret passages. I'm the one who knows where the foundation is weak. And if George wants to play the visionary, I'm going to give him a vision he'll never forget. I'm going to watch him lose everything, and I'm going to be the one who pulls the plug. As I walked toward the break room to get that water, I saw George's phone counter. He'd forgotten it in his rush to celebrate. A message flashed on the screen from Camilla, the head of marketing. It said, The offshore account is set up. Once the deal closes tonight and we get rid of Patricia, the $20 million transfer is yours. See you at the hotel. He wanted me gone. Fine. He wants a ghost? I'll give him a haunting. I want you to look at that subscribe button. You see it? Most people will scroll past this. Most people are like George, they take what they want, and they never look back. But if you're one of the ones who has been pushed aside, if you've been the Patricia in someone else's story, hit that button right now. Don't let the Georges of the world win. And if you're too afraid to subscribe, if you're okay with being ignored, then go ahead and leave a comment. Tell me why you're choosing to stay in the shadows. I'll be waiting. I stood in the break room, the cold air from the open fridge hitting my face. In my left hand, I held a bottle of premium sparkling water. In my right, I held George's unlocked phone. My eyes were fixed on that message from Camilla. Once we get rid of Patricia. The words burned into my retinas. George wasn't just taking the credit. He was planning to delete me from the company's history. He was going to take the $50 million from Martins and Robert, move it to an offshore account with his mistress, and leave me with a standard severance package and a non-disclosure agreement that would keep me gagged for a decade. I looked at the phone's contact list. Laura from legal was there. Jane and Mary had dozens of missed calls from him, likely coordinating the cleanup of my office. He had turned the entire infrastructure I built against me. I had two choices. I could walk back into that boardroom, throw the water in his face, and make a scene that would get me escorted out by security, or I could be the programmer I've always been. I chose the code. I didn't have much time. I opened the remote access app on George's phone. Because I was the one who set up his security protocols, I knew his master password was his own name followed by the date he made his first million. Predictable. Pathetic. I logged into the Aura Tech mainframe through his admin credentials. My fingers moved with a frantic precision. I navigated deep into the core of Sun Phoenix. This AI was designed to analyze market volatility, but it had a heartbeat protocol, a sequence that kept the data streams synchronized. I didn't destroy it. No, that would be too simple. Instead, I renamed a single subroutine. I created what we call a logic bomb. I tied the entire system's stability to my biometric scan. If the system didn't detect my specific keystroke cadence and retinal signature every 48 hours, the encryption keys would rotate into a recursive loop. The data wouldn't be deleted. It would just become unreachable, a digital fortress with no door. Suddenly, the break room doors swung open. I pulled back, nearly dropping the phone into the sink. It was Andre. He was leaning against the doorframe, his suit jacket tight across his shoulders, watching me with a look that wasn't quite friendly. "George is waiting for that water, Patricia," Andre said, his voice low and gravelly. "And he's wondering why you're holding his phone." I locked the screen and slid it across toward him. "He left it here," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I was just making sure it didn't get wet. Tell George I'll be right in." Andre didn't move for a long second. He picked up the phone, tucked it into his pocket, and stepped aside. "Don't take too long. You know how he gets when he's about to sign a deal." I grabbed the tray of water and walked back to the boardroom. As I entered, the atmosphere was electric. Martins was laughing at one of George's jokes. Robert was leafing through the deal's documents. Camilla was there now, too, sitting at the far end of the table, her eyes tracking me like a predator. George looked up, his face flushed with triumph. "Ah, there she is. Our favorite assistant. Put the tray over there, Pat. Then go see Laura. She has some papers for you to sign before the gala tonight." I looked at the papers on the table. The transfer of intellectual property forms. If I signed those, the logic bomb would be the only leverage I had left. "Of course, George," I said, leaning over to place his glass down. I leaned in close, so close I could see the tiny pores on his nose. "I'll go see Laura. But before I do, you should check the server status on the main monitor. There seems to be a minor fluctuation in the Phoenix core." George chuckled, waving a hand dismissively. "Probably just a ghost in the machine, right? Go on, Patricia. We've got this." As I turned to leave, the massive 98-inch 8K monitor at the front of the room flickered. The smooth green lines of the market predictor turned a sharp, jagged red. A small dialog box appeared in the center of the screen. "Critical error. Biometric sync required." Martins stopped laughing. Robert leaned forward, squinting. "George? What's that?" George's smile didn't disappear, but it froze. It became a mask. Nothing, Martins. Just a routine security check. Patricia, fix that on your way out, would you? I paused at the door, my hand on the handle. I didn't look back. I'm sorry, George. I think that's part of the solitary work you did in your private lab. I wouldn't want to interfere with your masterpiece. The silence in that room was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. I walked out and headed straight for the elevators. I didn't go to see Laura in legal. I went to the parking garage. As the elevator doors closed, I saw Denzel sprinting toward the server room. They thought it was a technical glitch. They had no idea it was a countdown. In exactly 4 hours, at the height of the deal's gala, George Vane was going to have to prove he was a genius in front of the entire world. And I was the only person on the planet who had the password. But as I reached my car, my phone vibrated. It was a text from an unknown number. I saw what you did on the server logs, Patricia. Meet me at the cafe on 4th Street in 10 minutes if you want to survive the night. Mary? Or was it Martins? Or was it someone else entirely? I sat in my car, staring at the text message. My mind raced. Was it Mary, the quiet assistant who always saw more than she let on? Or was it Martins, the lead investor, playing a double game? I shifted the car into drive. In this building, loyalty was a currency that had been devalued to zero. I pulled into the parking lot of the cafe on 4th Street. It was a low-lit hole in the wall, the kind of place where people go to disappear or to trade secrets. I saw someone in the back booth, a human shadow against the steamed-up windows. It was Mary. She looked different outside the office. Her usual professional mask had broken. As I sat down, she didn't look up from her coffee. "You're late, Patricia," she whispered. "How did you see the logs, Mary? You're an administrative assistant, not a systems admin." "George thinks I'm an idiot," she said, a bitter edge to her voice. "He thinks because I fetch his coffee and schedule his meetings with Camilla and Laura, I don't see the files he leaves on his desk. I've been BCCing myself on his private emails for 2 years, Patricia. I wasn't looking for code. I was looking for a way out." She slid an envelope across the table. I opened it. Inside were photos, bank statements, wire transfers, and a copy of a contract I had never seen. It wasn't just a deal. George wasn't selling Oratech to Martins and Robert. He was selling the assets and then filing for a structured bankruptcy. The contract showed that George had already stripped the company of its pension funds. My stock options? Worthless. Mary's savings? Gone. He was planning to burn the house down with us inside it so he could collect the insurance money and the $50 million consulting fee from the offshore account Camilla had set up. "He's not just a thief, Patricia," Mary whispered, leaning in. "He's a predator. He's been doing this since before you arrived. He finds a genius, drains them dry, and then moves on. Laura isn't just legal. She's his fixer. She makes sure the NDAs are airtight and the victims are too scared to talk." I looked at the photos of George and Camilla laughing on a yacht in Cabo, a trip he told me was a business retreat to secure our future. While I was drinking lukewarm coffee and fixing his errors, he was spending the money I earned him on the woman who was helping him rub me out. "Why tell me this now?" I asked. "Because," Mary said, her voice finally steady, "I saw what you did to the server. You're the first one who ever fought back. And I want to help you." Suddenly, a black SUV pulled up onto the curb outside the cafe. The tint was too dark to see inside, but I recognized the license plate. It was Andre. "George's shadow. He's tracking your phone," Mary hissed. "You have to go. Now." I grabbed the envelope and ran out the back exit just as the front door of the cafe chimed. I threw my phone into a passing trash truck, a $1,000 sacrifice to buy me a few hours of invisibility. I drove back toward the city, but not to my apartment. If George was using Andre and Denzel to find me, my home was a cage. I needed a place with high-speed fiber and zero paper trail. I headed to an old server co-location center in the industrial district, a place I'd set up years ago as a backup just in case. As I drove, I realized the logic bomb wasn't enough. If George filed for bankruptcy tonight, he'd still walk away with the $50 million. I didn't just want to stop the deal. I wanted to take the money too. I pulled up to the warehouse. My hands were no longer shaking. The heartbreak was gone, replaced by a cold, mathematical certainty. I walked into the dark, humming server room. The blue lights flickered across my face. I sat down at the terminal and began to type. George, I whispered to the empty room. You wanted to show the world your vision tonight? I'm going to make sure they see everything. Not just the code. Not just the AI. They're going to see the man behind the curtain. I accessed the gala's presentation script. I didn't change the slides. I changed the source. I linked the 98-inch boardroom monitor and the live stream going out to 5 million tech enthusiasts directly to George's private Sun Phoenix folder. But I added a new directory. I labeled it, The True Cost of Genius. Inside, I uploaded every email Mary gave me. Every wire transfer to Camilla. Every threat sent from Laura. And at the very bottom I placed a single video file. A recording of the night George told me he loved me, captured by the security AI I'd built to monitor the office, the same AI he claimed he designed. I hit enter. The upload bar reached 99%, and then stalled. System alert. External override detected. A voice came over the server room's intercom. It was Martin's. Patricia? I know you're in there. Martin's voice boomed, calm and terrifyingly polite. You've been a very busy girl. But you see, George isn't the only one who needs this deal to go through. Open the door, and maybe we can talk about a new arrangement. The locks on the warehouse door clicked. They weren't locking me out, they were locking me in. I stared at the monitor. 99%. The progress bar was a mocking sliver of blue light. External override. I should have known. George was a puppet, a charismatic face used to sell the dream. But men like Martins and Robert? They were the puppeteers. They didn't care about the code. They didn't care about the genius. They cared about the $2 billion valuation that was about to evaporate because a scorned assistant decided to develop a conscience. Patricia, Martin's voice came again over the intercom, smooth as silk and just as cold. I'm standing outside with Denzel. We don't want to break anything. Especially not that brilliant head of yours. Just unlock the terminal and let the upload fail. We can forget this ever happened. Forget? How do you forget the moment you realize your entire life's work was just a line item on a billionaire's tax write-off? I looked at the terminal. My fingers hovered over the keys. If I opened that door, I was signing my own professional death warrant. Laura would have the papers ready before I could even blink. Non-disclosure agreements, harassment suits, maybe even a confession that I tried to sabotage the company. I felt a tear slip down my cheek. It wasn't out of fear. It was out of the sheer, exhausting weight of it all. For 6 years, I had protected George. I had stayed late to make sure he didn't look like an idiot in front of Martin's. I had literally built the pedestal they were standing on, and now they were using it to crush me. You're a smart girl, Patricia, Martin's continued. You know how this ends. George is a fool, we know that. Once the merger is signed, we're phasing him out anyway. Why go down with a sinking ship? Join us. Give us the encryption key, and I'll make sure you're the CEO of the new subsidiary. You'll have the title you deserve. I paused. CEO. The title I had dreamed of. The power to finally make the decisions. It was the ultimate bait. You're lying, I said, my voice projecting into the room's microphone. You don't want a CEO, Martins. You want a ghost. You want me to keep the lights on while you strip the assets, just like George did. You don't even know what my code does, do you? There was a silence on the other end. Then, the sound of a heavy blow against the warehouse door. Denzel was losing his patience. I had to move. I couldn't stop the override from the terminal, but the servers were physical. I grabbed a screwdriver from the maintenance kit and sprinted to Rack 4, the heart of the Phoenix logic. If I couldn't upload the truth to the world, I would bury the truth where no one could find it. I began unscrewing the housing of the primary drive. My mind was racing back to that night 3 months ago, the night George said he loved me. He had looked me in the eyes, his hand on mine, and said, Patricia, you're the only person in this world I can trust. I realized now he wasn't talking about love. He was talking about safety. He trusted me to keep his secrets. He trusted me to be his silence. Well, the silence was over. As I pulled the drive, I noticed a second, smaller drive tucked behind the cooling fan. It wasn't mine. It wasn't part of the original architecture. It had a different serial number. A government-grade hardware encryption seal. I plugged my laptop directly into it, bypassing the warehouse network. My breath hitched. He was selling the AI's predictive algorithms to a private military contractor Robert's side firm. They weren't using it to predict market crashes. They were using it to predict civil unrest. To target people. The warehouse door groaned. A massive crack appeared in the reinforced wood. Patricia. Denzel's voice roared from the other side. Last chance. I looked at the data on my screen. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was a crime against the public. If this deal went through, George would be a billionaire, and the world would have a weapon it didn't even know existed. I didn't stop the upload. I redirected it. I didn't send it to the gala. I sent it to the SEC, the FBI, and every major news outlet in the country. And then, I did the one thing George never expected. I opened the door. I stood there, holding the small encrypted drive in my hand like a grenade. Denzel lunged forward, but Martins held up a hand, his eyes fixed on the drive. You don't want to do that, Patricia, Martins said, his face pale in the blue light. It's already done, Martins, I said, a slow, calm smile spreading across my face. The ghost just went live. And she has a lot to say. You see that? That's the moment the hunter becomes the prey. If you're watching this right now, feeling that chill down your spine because you know exactly what it's like to be backed into a corner, hit that subscribe button. Don't wait until they break down your door. Show them that the invisible people have the most power. And for those of you who are still sitting on the fence, tell me in the comments, what's your price? What would it take for you to sell out the person who trusted you? Because George and Martins are waiting to hear from you. Martins sat beside me in the back of the black SUV. To any passerby, we looked like two executives heading to a celebration. But under the hem of my silk dress, I could feel the cold weight of the encrypted drive I'd managed to slip into my garter. And pressed against my ribs was the firm warning of Denzel's hand on the seat behind my head. You're going to walk into that gala, Patricia, Martins said, adjusting his cufflinks. You're going to stand on that stage. When the biometric error pops up, you are going to scan your retina, enter the key, and then you are going to sit down and smile while George signs that contract. If you do that, you walk away with $5 million and a clean record. $5 million. The price of my silence had gone up. But the price of my soul was no longer for sale. And if I don't? I asked, looking out at the California sunset. Then Laura will file a report stating that you attempted to extort the company. Jane and Mary have already signed affidavits under duress. Of course you'll be in a cell before the champagne even goes flat. I didn't doubt him. In this world, the truth isn't what happened. It's what you can pay people to say. We pulled up to the Fairmont Hotel. The red carpet was rolled out. Flashbulbs were popping like tiny explosions. I saw George. He was standing at the top of the stairs, a glass of vintage crystal in his hand, laughing with Camilla. She was wearing a dress that probably cost more than my first car bought with the money George stole from our retirement fund. George saw me. For a second his face went pale, a flash of genuine terror crossing his eyes. He knew I'd been at the warehouse. He knew I knew. But then the CEO mask slid back on. He waved us over like we were his best friends. Patricia! There she is! George shouted, his voice booming over the crowd. The woman of the hour. I was just telling Camilla how lost I'd be without my right hand. He reached out to hug me. I felt his heart racing against my chest. He leaned into my ear, his breath smelling of expensive grapes and cowardice. Fix it, he hissed, his voice a jagged blade. Fix the server, or I swear to God, Patricia, you'll never work in this town again. I'll ruin you. I pulled back. I'm not here to fix your problems anymore, George. I'm just here to watch the show. Martins escorted me toward the VIP command center, a glass-walled room overlooking the ballroom. Inside, Robert was pacing, staring at a laptop. The logic bomb I'd planted was ticking. The server was already starting to dump non-essential data to make room for the recursive loop. She's here, Martins announced. Robert turned around, his face a mask of fury. The investors are getting nervous, George. The system is lagging. We have 10 minutes before the live demo. Patricia, sit down. I sat. My fingers touched the familiar keys of the terminal. But I wasn't looking at the code. I was looking at the sidebar of the internal server. While they were watching the Sun Phoenix logs, I navigated to the private correspondence folder I'd mirrored earlier. I saw a file labeled L.C. Final Plan. Laura and Camilla. I opened it, Camilla and Laura were planning to dump George. They had a secondary offshore account one George didn't know about. They were planning to funnel the $50 million out the moment the deal closed, leaving George to face the bankruptcy fraud charges alone. George thought he was the shark. He didn't realize he was just the chum in the water. 5 minutes, Patricia, Robert growled. Enter the biometric bypass. Now. I looked through the glass at the ballroom. George was on stage now, leaning into the microphone. And now, he said, beaming at the cameras, I will demonstrate the power of Phoenix, a system that I alone, designed to secure our financial future. I looked at the screen. I looked at the bypass button. My finger hovered over the enter key. But I didn't enter the bypass. I entered a command that merged the L.C. final plan document with the main presentation. What are you doing? Martins yelled, lunging for the keyboard. I stood up, knocking the chair over. I'm giving the visionary what he asked for, I said, my voice ringing out over the hum of the servers. I'm giving him a clear view of the future. On the giant 98-inch screen behind George, the market graphs vanished. In their place, a giant, high-resolution image appeared. It was a screenshot of Camilla's private bank account, followed by a transcript of her and Laura discussing how pathetic George was for thinking he was in control. The room went deathly silent. George turned around, his jaw dropping. Do you hear that? That's the sound of a glass empire shattering. If you've ever waited for the perfect moment to speak your truth, hit that subscribe button. Don't let them keep you in the VIP room while they steal your life. And if you're one of those people who would rather stay silent and take the $5 million, tell me in the comments. I want to know what your integrity is worth. Because tonight, George found out his was worth absolutely nothing. The silence in the ballroom didn't last long. It was replaced by a sound I'll never forget, the collective gasp of 500 of California's elite, followed by the frantic clicking of 100 camera shutters. On the massive screen, George was framed by the evidence of his own stupidity. To his left, the bank statements showing his embezzlement. To his right, the private messages from Camilla calling him a useful idiot who was too blinded by his own ego to see he was being bled dry. George stood frozen. His $50 million smile had vanished, replaced by the pale, slack-jawed expression of a man who had just watched his own execution. He looked back at the screen, then toward the VIP booth where I stood. Patricia, he screamed, his voice cracking and carrying over the live audio feed. What did you do? Shut it down. Shut it down. Inside the glass room, Martins lunged for me. His face was purple with rage. He didn't care about George's feelings, but he cared about the billion-dollar deal that was currently dissolving into a federal investigation on live television. You little, Martins started, his hand reaching for my throat. But Denzel stepped between us. I didn't expect that. Denzel, the man who had been my shadow and my threat for the last 48 hours, stood like a wall of granite between me and the lead investor. He didn't look at Martins. He looked at me. The police are at the front entrance, Denzel said, his voice a low rumble. And the SEC is on the phone. You have 3 minutes to get out the back service elevator before this entire building becomes a crime scene. Denzel, what are you doing? Martins roared. Grab her. I don't work for people who sell predictive algorithms to war criminals, Martins, Denzel said calmly. I took a look at that drive she was carrying. My brother is a veteran. I know what that code does. Get out of here, Patricia. Now. I didn't wait for a second invitation. I grabbed my laptop and the encrypted drive. I sprinted out the back door of the VIP booth, my heels clicking rhythmically against the marble, a sound that used to signal my arrival to serve George but now signaled my departure to destroy him. I reached the service elevator. As the doors began to close, I saw Laura and Camilla trying to push through the crowd in the ballroom, their faces masks of panic. They were trying to reach the exits before the authorities could freeze their accounts. They weren't going to make it. I had already set a script to lock their digital passports the moment the gala presentation was breached. I hit the button for the garage. But as the elevator descended, my laptop chimed, a notification from the Aura Tech mainframe. Transfer complete. While George was screaming on stage and Martins was fighting Denzel, I had initiated a final, hidden command. I didn't steal the $50 million, I wasn't that stupid. Instead, I had redirected the severance funds George had set aside for himself into a locked escrow account for the Aura Tech employees whose pensions he had gutted. I watched the numbers tick up. $10 million. $20 million. $40 million. For the first time in 6 years, I felt like I could breathe. It wasn't the full justice I wanted, not yet, but it was a start. I was no longer the assistant. I was the one holding the keys to the vault. The elevator doors opened into the cold air of the parking garage. I ran toward my car, but someone stepped out from behind a concrete pillar. It was Jane, the office assistant. She was holding a tablet, her hands trembling. "Patricia," she whispered, "you have to see this, George. He's not just standing there anymore. He's telling the press that you were the one who embezzled the money. He's saying you framed him because he rejected your advances. He's making himself the victim." I looked at the tablet. George was on the news, a single, fake tear rolling down his cheek. "I loved her like a daughter," he was telling a reporter. I had no idea she was capable of such malice. I looked at Jane. "He wants to play the victim? Fine. Let's give him a real reason to cry." I opened my laptop one last time. "Jane, do you still have the login for the office security cameras? The ones in his private lab?" Jane nodded, a small vengeful smile forming on her lips. "I've had them for months." "Good," I said, my fingers flying across the keys. "Let's show the world what George Vane really does in his solitary work hours. He's lying to the world. He's trying to make me the villain because he knows he can't win on the facts. If you've ever had someone flip the script and blame you for the pain they caused, if you've ever been gaslit by someone you trusted, hit that subscribe button right now. Don't let the liars win. And for those of you who think George is still the hero, tell me in the comments. I want to hear how you justify a man who steals from his own people and blames the woman who built him." I'm waiting. The garage was silent, save for the hum of my laptop. Jane leaned over my shoulder, her breath shallow as we watched the grainy, high-angle footage from George's private lab, the room where he supposedly spent 18 months perfecting the Phoenix Code. "Look at the timestamp," I whispered. The footage showed George. He wasn't coding. He wasn't even reading. He was sitting at his desk, feet up, tossing a stress ball against the wall while laughing into his phone. But it was the person sitting across from him that made the air vanish from my lungs. It was Robert. Robert, the lead investor. The man who had been questioning George's genius in the boardroom for months. The man who had just tried to force me to enter the biometric bypass. On the screen, Robert was handing George a small, silver-encrypted drive, the exact same model as the one I had found hidden in the server rack. "The predictive algorithm is ready," Robert said on the recording, his voice crystal clear through the hidden mic I'd installed months ago. "My contacts in the defense sector are satisfied. Once the merger closes and Patricia is out of the way, we liquidate Aura Tech. George, you get your $50 million, and I get the most powerful surveillance tool in the world. It's a win-win." George laughed, a sound that made my skin crawl. "And Patricia, what if she talks?" Robert's expression on the screen went cold, a look of pure, predatory indifference. "She won't. Laura has the incident report ready. We'll make sure her reputation is so toxic that no one will even let her code a grocery list, let alone an AI. She'll be lucky if she isn't in a federal prison by Christmas." The betrayal I felt previously was a paper cut. This was a gunshot. Robert wasn't just an investor. He was the architect of the entire conspiracy. He had used George as a puppet to acquire my work so he could weaponize it. But then, something even stranger happened on the footage. George left the room to take a call, leaving Robert alone. Robert immediately pulled out a second phone and dialed a number. "It's me," Robert said. "George is a fool. He thinks he's getting $50 million. Once the deal hits the final stage, I want the security breach protocol activated. We'll frame George for the embezzlement, let the authorities take him down, and I'll buy the assets for pennies on the dollar during the bankruptcy sale. We don't need the architect once we have the code." The voice on the other end of the line was muffled, but I recognized the cadence. It was Martin's. They weren't just betraying me. They were betraying George. They were betraying each other. It was a circle of vipers, each one waiting for the other to turn their back. "Jane," I said, my fingers flying across the keys. "They think they're playing chess, but they forgot I'm the one who built the board. I didn't just have the embezzlement evidence anymore. I had a recorded confession of a conspiracy to commit national security fraud. I had proof that the investors were planning to steal the company through an illegal bankruptcy. Suddenly, the car window shattered. Glass exploded inward, spraying across the seats. A hand reached through the jagged opening, grabbing the laptop. I screamed, shoving the car into reverse and slamming on the gas. "Patricia, look out!" Jane yelled. A second black SUV was blocking the garage exit. Andre was standing there, his face illuminated by the harsh overhead lights, his gun drawn. But he wasn't pointing it at me. He was pointing it at the man who had just smashed my window. It was Denzel. "Step away from the car, Denzel," Andre shouted. "You're making a big mistake." Denzel held my laptop like a shield. "The mistake was thinking I'd let Robert sell my country out, Andre. Now back off." I sat in the driver's seat, heart hammering against my ribs. I was caught between two hired guns, in the middle of a war between billionaire thieves, holding the only evidence that could burn them all. We didn't wait to see who pulled the trigger first. I slammed the car into drive, swerved around Andre, and roared out of that garage with Jane clutching the dashboard and Denzel lunging into the backseat at the last possible second. We didn't stop until we reached a derelict motel on the outskirts of San Jose, a place where the neon sign flickered in a language of broken promises. Inside the room, the air smelled of stale cigarettes and cheap bleach. I set my laptop on the scarred table. Denzel stood by the window, his hand resting on the holster at his hip, his eyes scanning the parking lot. Jane was sitting on the edge of the bed, her face ghostly pale in the flickering light. "They're going to kill us, aren't they?" Jane whispered. "No," I said, my voice sounding steadier than I felt. "They can't kill us yet. They still don't have the encryption key. To Martins and Robert, I'm not a person. I'm the only vault combination to $1 billion weapon. And you don't blow up the vault until you have the gold." I turned to Denzel. "Why did you help me? You were on George's payroll. You were Robert's shadow." Denzel didn't turn around. "I was hired to protect an asset. I wasn't hired to facilitate treason. Robert's defense contacts aren't who he says they are. I saw the manifests on that drive you found. He's selling the Phoenix predictive logic to a group that specializes in destabilization. If that code goes live, people die. Real people. Not just numbers on a spreadsheet." I looked at the screen. The Vipers were all in play. George was the distraction. Laura and Camilla were the scavengers. Martins and Robert were the monsters. "If we're going to take them down," I said, opening a blank terminal window, "we can't just leak the data. They own the news cycles. They own the lawyers. We have to make them destroy each other. We have to play the Vipers against the wolves." I began to map out the final script. It wasn't code for an AI. It was a psychological blueprint. Leverage Camilla's secret account. I would send an anonymous tip to George, showing him exactly how his love was planning to leave him penniless. Feed Martin's proof that Robert was planning to cut him out of the defense deal. The logic bomb. I wouldn't disarm it. I would accelerate it. "I'm going to send a message to all of them," I whispered. "A meeting. Tonight. At the Aura Tech headquarters. I'm going to tell them I'm ready to hand over the key to the highest bidder." "But you don't have a high bidder," Jane said. "They'll just kill you once you type it in." "I do have a bidder," I said, a dark smile playing on my lips. "The only person they're all actually afraid of." I pulled up a contact I hadn't touched in years. Denzel looked over my shoulder and his eyes widened. "You're calling him?" "The only way to stop a monster," I said, "is to bring in the man who created the cage." I hit send on an encrypted email. The recipient, the Office of the Attorney General, but I didn't send it to the main desk. I sent it to a private burner phone belonging to a man George thought he had bought off years ago. Suddenly, a loud knock echoed through the motel room door. Denzel drew his weapon in a blurred motion. Jane gasped, retreating into the corner. I froze, my hand over the laptop. "Patricia," a muffled voice came from outside. It wasn't a man's voice. It was soft, familiar, and dripping with a strange kind of pity. "It's Mary. I brought the rest of the files. And I brought someone else you need to see." I looked at Denzel. He nodded slowly. I opened the door. Standing behind Mary was Laura, the fixer from legal. She wasn't wearing her power suit. She looked disheveled, her mascara running. "They're going to kill me, Patricia," Laura sobbed. "George found the offshore account. He think I'm the one who leaked the presentation. You have to help me and I'll give you the one thing George is most afraid of, the red folder. The red folder. The holy grail of Aura Tech's secrets. The one thing that proved George didn't just steal my work, but that he had stolen the company itself from its original founder. Laura collapsed into the moth-eaten armchair, her hands shaking as she clutched a leather-bound folio. The red folder. In the corporate world, it was a myth, a ghost story George used to tell to keep the board in line. I thought it was just a list of bribes or offshore accounts. I was wrong. Open it, Patricia, Laura whispered, her voice barely audible over the rain. George didn't just find you in a recruitment pool 6 years ago. He didn't discover your talent at that tech mixer in San Francisco. I opened the folder. My eyes scanned the first page. It was an original incorporation deed for Oratech dated 15 years ago. Long before I'd even graduated. At the bottom were 2 signatures, George Vane and Martin's. I grew up in poverty, working 3 jobs to pay for a degree I hoped would redeem my family name. Patricia? Denzel asked, his hand on my shoulder. We have to move. The tracker on Laura's car just went active. They know she's here. I felt a coldness spreading from my chest to my fingertips. The logic bomb I'd built. It wasn't enough anymore. A few leaked emails and some embezzled funds weren't justice. Not for this. They think they're bringing me to Oratech tonight to sign over the keys, I said, my voice sounding like it was coming from a long way off. I looked at the red folder. I looked at the encrypted drive. Denzel, give me your phone. Jane, I need you to go to the police station, not the local one, the federal building. Give them this folder. Don't stop for anyone. Not even if you see a siren. What are you going to do? Jane asked, terrified. I'm going to meet them, I said. But I'm not bringing the encryption key. I'm bringing the Terminus protocol. As I stood up, the motel window shattered. The room turned into a blinding white void. High-pitched ringing drowned out the screams. I felt a heavy hand grab my arm, dragging me toward the door. The drive. I heard Martin's roar through the chaos. Get the drive and the girl, leave the rest. The last thing I saw before the darkness took me was George, standing in the doorway, his face illuminated by the strobe light. He wasn't smiling anymore. He looked like a man who had finally run out of lies. They think they've won. They think because they have me in handcuffs they have the code. If you've ever discovered that the people you were supposed to trust were the ones who set the fire, hit that subscribe button. Don't let them rewrite your history. And for those of you who think I should have just taken the money and run, tell me in the comments. Would you sell your father's ghost for $5 million? Because George is about to find out that some things don't have a price. The smell of ozone and expensive floor wax. That was the first thing I noticed when the hood was ripped off my head. I was back, the 40th floor. The war room of Oratech. But the boardroom table had been cleared. In its place was a single workstation, and standing around it like vultures circling a dying animal were George, Martins, and Robert. George looked disheveled. His tie was loose, his hair once perfect was matted with sweat. He leaned down, his face inches from mine. The gala is a disaster, Patricia, he hissed. The stock is plummeting. The SEC is freezing our domestic accounts. You have just few seconds to enter the Terminus bypass and fix the glitch on the screen. Give us back the Phoenix logic, and maybe I'll let you live long enough to see the sunrise. I looked at him. I didn't see a visionary. I didn't even see a villain. I saw a parasitic ghost who had been living off my hard work for 15 years. The glitch isn't a mistake, George, I said, my voice sounding hollow in the vast room. It's a mirror. And I think you're afraid of what's looking back. Robert stepped forward, slamming a heavy briefcase onto the desk. He opened it to reveal a satellite uplink. We don't have time for the scorned woman routine, Patricia. My clients are waiting. The encryption key. Now. Or Denzel and that little assistant Jane won't make it to the police station. They had Jane? I looked at Martins. He was staring at his watch, his face a mask of cold impatience. I'll do it. I whispered. But I need to be untied. The biometric scan requires a specific pressure sequence on the haptic sensors. You know that, George. You designed it, remember? George flushed a deep, angry red. He nodded to Andre, who was standing by the door. The zip ties were cut. My wrists burned, the skin raw and red, but I didn't let my hands shake. I sat at the terminal. The screen was a sea of cascading red code. I'm entering the bypass, I announced. On the massive wall monitor, the critical error box vanished. A progress bar appeared. Restoring system integrity, 10%, 20%. George let out a long, shuddering breath of relief. He actually patted me on the shoulder. Good girl, Pat. I knew you'd see reason. We can still fix this. We'll tell the press it was a sophisticated hack from a foreign entity. You'll be the hero who saved the company. Martins interjected, his voice like grinding stones. The system is restoring. Once that bar hits 100%, we have the data, and you become a footnote in a very tragic suicide note we've already drafted for you. I looked at the bar. 85%. 90%. You're right, Martins, I said, a dark, terrifyingly calm smile spreading across my lips. The system is restoring. But I didn't tell you what it was restoring. The bar hit 100%. The screen didn't turn green, it turned black. And then a single line of text appeared in white. Property of Thomas Miller. Reclamation protocol initialized. Suddenly, every phone in the room began to vibrate. Every tablet, every computer. George pulled his phone out, his eyes widening in horror. What is this? He shrieked. My accounts. They're emptying. Martins. The offshore funds, they're being wired to the Oratech Employee Pension Fund. It's not just the money, George, I said, standing up and backing away from the desk. Look at the screen. The presentation at the gala, which was still being live-streamed to millions, didn't just show the embezzlement anymore. It was playing the footage from the warehouse. The footage of Robert talking about the military contracts. The footage of George admitting he didn't know the code. The elevators chimed. The doors slid open. It wasn't more hired guns. It was the FBI. And leading them, holding a stack of federal warrants, was Mary and a very bruised but very alive Denzel. George Vane, the lead agent, shouted, weapons drawn. Hands in the air, now. George looked at the window. We were 40 floors up. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a desperate, pathetic rage. He lunged for me, but Denzel was faster. There is no feeling in the world like watching a giant fall. If you've been waiting for the moment the truth finally catches up to the lies, hit that subscribe button. Don't let them tell you that the little people can't win. And for those of you who think I'm the villain for taking his money, tell me in the comments. Is it theft if you're just taking back what was stolen from your father? I'll be reading every single one of your laments. The air in the federal holding facility smelled of floor wax and stale coffee. It was a far cry from the sandalwood and expensive leather of the Oratech executive suite. I sat behind the thick plexiglass, waiting. A door opened on the other side. George was led in by 2 guards. He wasn't wearing his Italian suit anymore. He was in a coarse orange jumpsuit that made his skin look sallow and gray. The architect of the future looked like a man who had finally run out of time. He sat down, picking up the phone with a hand that wouldn't stop shaking. Patricia, he whispered. His voice was thin, stripped of the booming charisma that had fooled the world for 15 years. You have to help me. Martins and Robert, they're pinning everything on me. They're saying I was the mastermind. That I coerced them. You know that's not true. You were there. I wasn't just there. George, I said, finally lifting the receiver. I was the one who handed them the evidence. I was the one who made sure the Sun Phoenix logs included your private recordings with Camilla and Laura. George's face twisted. Why? I gave you everything. I made you the highest paid assistant in Silicon Valley. I was going to give you a seat at the table. You didn't give me a seat at the table, George. You gave me the scraps from a table you stole. Did you think I'd never find the red folder? Did you think I'd never see the photos of the garage where Oratech actually started? Maybe, I said, tilting my head. But here's the thing about nobodies, George. We're the ones who write the code. And code doesn't care about your vision. It only cares about the truth. I leaned closer to the glass. I didn't just come here to see you in a jumpsuit, George. I came to tell you that Oratech is gone. The board dissolved this morning. The assets were frozen. But the intellectual property, the Phoenix algorithm, it didn't go to Martins or Robert. George's eyes widened. What do you mean? It's company property. I own it all, George. Every line. Every byte. I'm not your assistant anymore. I'm the person who owns the very air you breathe in this industry. And I've decided to make the Phoenix code open source. It's free. For everyone. Your billion-dollar weapon is now a public utility. George began to scream a raw, animalistic sound of pure loss. He lunged at the glass, but the guards caught him, dragging him back toward the heavy steel door. "You're nothing," he shrieked. "You're just a girl. You'll fail without me." I hung up the phone. I didn't look back. As I walked out of the facility and into the California sun, my phone flashed. It was a text from Denzel. "Martin's just tried to flee the country. The FBI picked him up at a private airstrip in Napa. We have the red folder in the hands of the Attorney General. It's over, Patricia." But as I reached my car, I saw someone familiar leaning against the door. It was Laura. She wasn't crying anymore. She looked sharp, cold, and calculated. "It's not over," Laura said, holding up a small, black tablet. "You think you won because George is in jail? Robert is already out on bail. He has friends in the Pentagon, Patricia. And they don't care about heirs or open source. They want their AI. And they've authorized a national security seizure of your servers." I thought the worst was over. I thought that once George was behind bars, the truth would be my shield. I was a fool. In the world of high-stakes technology, the truth isn't a shield, it's a target. "They're behind us, Patricia," Denzel said, his voice as flat as a stone. I looked at the side mirror. 2 dark sedans, no plates, keeping a perfect 3-car distance. These weren't Robert's hired thugs. They moved with the precision of federal agents or worse. "The national security seizer," I whispered, the words tasting like ash. Laura wasn't lying. Robert didn't just want the money. He sold the idea of Phoenix to people who don't care about patent law. I had made the code open source, but the master servers, the ones containing the neural weights that made the AI actually work, were still sitting in the industrial warehouse. If they seized those, they didn't need me. They didn't need the key. They would just rip the hardware apart. "We can't go to the warehouse," I shouted over the thunder. "That's exactly where they want us. Denzel, if they get that hardware, the predictive algorithms will be used to profile every citizen in this country. It won't be a tool for progress. It'll be a digital leash." Denzel gripped the steering wheel. "Then we don't go to the warehouse. We go to the source." "What source?" "The old data relay in the Santa Cruz Mountains," Denzel said, swerving the car onto a dirt off-road. "You told me about it once. If we can trigger the Terminus protocol from there, we can wipe the warehouse servers remotely." The car jolted as we hit the mountain path. The sedans behind us didn't slow down. They weren't trying to pull us over. They were trying to run us off the cliff. My phone vibrated in my lap. A FaceTime call from Mary. I swiped it open, expecting a warning. But Mary wasn't at the police station. She was standing in the Aura Tech boardroom, and standing behind her, holding a tablet, was Martin's. "He's out, Patricia," Mary sobbed, her face bruised. "Martin's didn't go to jail. He made a deal. He gave them the location of your mountain relay. He knew about it the whole time." Martins looked into the camera, his expression one of bored disappointment. "You're predictable, Patricia. You always go back to the beginning when you're scared. I'm already at the relay. If you want Mary to stay in one piece, you'll bring the encrypted drive here. Now." The line went dead. "It's a trap," Denzel growled, slamming the brakes as we reached a fork in the road. "If we go to the relay, we give them the drive. If we go to the warehouse, they seize the hardware. We're losing the war, Patricia." I looked at the encrypted drive in my hand. The drive I had risked everything for. I looked at the dark mountain peaks ahead of us. "No," I said, a cold, desperate clarity settling over me. "We're not losing. We're just playing the wrong game. Denzel, give me your laptop. I need to access the Aura Tech Sun Phoenix backdoor, the one even George didn't know about." "I'm not wiping the servers," I said, my teeth gritted. "I'm uploading a virus into the national security seizure request. If they try to download the data, it won't just fail. It'll trace the request back to the source. It'll show the world exactly which government officials were in bed with Robert." But as the upload hit 40%, the car's engine sputtered and died. The electronics flickered. A high-pitched whine filled the air. "EMP," Denzel cursed, looking at the dead dashboard. "They hit us with a localized pulse. We're dead in the water." The 2 sedans pulled up behind us, their headlights blinding in the rain. Doors opened. Men in tactical gear stepped out, their weapons raised, and walking between them, holding an umbrella as if he were attending a garden party, was Robert. "The games are over, Patricia," Robert said, his voice amplified by a megaphone. Hand over the drive or we'll see how well your open-source ethics hold up against a federal black site. This is it. The moment where the law becomes the criminal. They've cut the power, they've cut the lines, and they've cut our escape. If you've ever felt the entire weight of the world trying to crush you just for doing the right thing, hit that subscribe button. Don't let them turn off your light. And for those of you who think I should just drop the drive in the mud and surrender, tell me in the comments, is a legacy worth your life? I'm about to find out in the dark. The world was pitch black, save for the twin beams of Robert's sedans cutting through the mountain mist. My laptop was dead. Denzel's hand was hovering over his sidearm, but we both knew against 6 men with tactical rifles and a government mandate, a handgun was just a loud way to die. Robert stepped closer, the water beating off his expensive trench coat. The drive, Patricia. Last time I'm asking. I don't want to make you a martyr. Martyrs are bad for the stock price. I just want the code. I looked at the small, silver drive in my palm. It felt cold, heavier than it should be. You won't be able to use it, Robert. I said, my voice cracking. It's tied to my biometrics. If you kill me, the encryption keys will scramble. You'll have $1 billion worth of digital junk. Robert smiled. It was a thin, cruel line. We have a neural bypass for that. It's painful, and you won't be the same afterward, but we'll get what we need. Laura has already drafted the Mental Health Act paperwork to hold you indefinitely. Nobody is coming for you. He reached for the car door handle, but as his fingers touched the metal, the drive in my hand began to glow. A soft, pulse-like blue light emanated from the seams of the casing. It shouldn't have been possible. The EMP had fried every battery in a 50-yard radius. Suddenly, the car's speakers completely dead seconds ago erupted with a burst of static. The blue light from the drive intensified, turning the interior of the car into a neon cathedral. Outside, the tactical team's radios began to scream with feedback. Their headsets sparked. What is happening? Denzel asked, shielding his eyes. It's a kinetic uplink, I whispered, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. The drive is drawing power from their own vehicle's auxiliary batteries. It's using their own equipment to reboot itself. The blue light projected a holographic interface onto the windshield. Thousands of files began to scroll too fast for the human eye to read. But at the bottom, a single folder flashed in gold, the real investor. I tapped it. The screen showed a series of wire transfers. They didn't lead to Robert. They didn't lead to Martin's. They led to a shell company owned by Camilla's father, a man who sat on the Senate Intelligence Committee. The conspiracy didn't stop at the board of Oratech. It went to the very heart of the people who were supposed to be seizing the servers for national security. They weren't seizing them for the country. They were seizing them for a private family dynasty. Robert, I said, looking through the glass at the man who was now shaking with fear. The drive just sent the reclamation protocol to the public cloud. But it did something else. It just released the surveillance footage from your private meeting with the senator, the one where you discussed thinning the herd using the Phoenix algorithm. The tactical team lowered their weapons. They looked at each other, then at Robert. They weren't his men. They were government employees. And they had just received an alert on their own encrypted tablets, a direct order from the Inspector General's office. Robert's phone chimed. He looked at it, and for the first time, I saw the face of a man who knew he was already a ghost. It's over, Robert, I said. The phoenix is finally rising, and you're the one in the ashes. The mountain air was freezing, but I had never felt warmer. Robert stood in the mud, coat ruined, his face illuminated by the flickering blue light. He looked at the tactical team, the men who were supposed to be his private army, and saw only strangers. They won't help you, Robert, I said, stepping out of the car. The national security shield you were hiding behind just shattered. One of the agents stepped forward, his rifle lowered. He checked his tablet one last time, then looked at Robert. Sir, we have a direct order from the Department of Justice. Your authorization has been revoked. You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit treason and the illegal solicitation of state secrets. Robert looked at me with a hollow, dead stare. You think you've won, Patricia? You've just inherited a target. The senator. The people above him. They don't lose. They do today, I replied. I didn't stay to watch them cuff him. I had one final destination, the heart of the empire, Tech HQ. Denzel drove us back into the city in one of the seized sedans. The city lights of San Francisco blurred into long streaks of gold and neon. We reached the glass tower an hour before dawn. The lobby was empty, the security guards gone, the building glowing like a tomb. I went straight to the 40th floor. I went to the CEO's office. I sat in George's chair. It felt cold. Unearned. I opened the main broadcast terminal. The world was waking up to the biggest tech scandal in history. The Phoenix files were trending everywhere. But I wasn't finished. I needed the world to hear the truth from the only person left who could tell it. I sent a single, high-priority ping to Camilla and Laura. I have the location of the secondary offshore account. Meet me in the war room in 10 minutes or the FBI gets the password. They arrived together. Camilla was wearing a trench coat over pajamas, her eyes wide with terror. Laura looked like she hadn't slept in a week. They stood in the doorway, staring at me, the woman they had laughed at, the woman they had planned to delete. Sit down, I said. It wasn't a request. Patricia, please, Camilla sobbed. I didn't know about the military contracts. I was just following George's lead. He told me we were building a future together. You were building a future, Camilla, I said, spinning the monitor around. And yours, Laura? You handled the legal side of my father's accident. You're the one who made sure the police report never mentioned the second vehicle, the one registered to George Vane. Laura's face went bone white. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. I'm giving you both one chance, I said, leaning forward. The cameras are live. Right now. 5 million people are watching this feed. You are going to confess. You are going to name the senator, you are going to name the shell companies. And in exchange, I won't release the encryption keys to your personal accounts. You'll lose your freedom, but you won't be penniless when you get out. Camilla looked at the camera. She looked at me. Then, she looked at the rec light. She began to talk. For 20 minutes, the world watched as the marketing genius and the fixer dismantled the very empire they helped build. They laid out the bribes, the threats, and the blood. They showed the world that George Vane was just a front for a much larger, much uglier machine. As the police sirens began to wail outside the building, I stood up. I walked to the window and looked out at the sunrise over the bay. My phone vibrated. A private number. Patricia, a voice said. It was deep, calm, and carried the weight of true authority. This is the Attorney General. We have the red folder. We have the confession. And we have the senator in custody. You did it, Miller. You brought them all down. I didn't do it alone, I said, looking at the silver drive on the desk. Justice isn't a gift. It's something you have to program, line by line, until the system has no choice but to reboot. If you've been waiting for the moment your enemies finally have to look you in the eye and admit they were wrong, hit that subscribe button. This is what it looks like when the truth wins. And for those of you who think I was too hard on Camilla and Laura, tell me in the comments. Would you show mercy to them? I'm waiting for your comments. A week later, I stood on the balcony of the Tech building except the sign had already been taken down. The gold letters that spelled out George Vane's name were sitting in a dumpster in the alleyway. In their place, a temporary banner fluttered in the wind, Miller Systems. I watched the sun rise over the Pacific. For the first time in 6 years I didn't have a list of George's fires to put out. I didn't have a secret algorithm to hide. I was just Patricia. The fallout was global. Martins and Robert were facing charges that would keep them in a courtroom for the next 20 years. Camilla and Laura had turned state's evidence, trading their freedom for a lifetime of looking over their shoulders. And the senator? He had resigned in a scandal that was being called the digital Watergate. But justice doesn't fill the hole where a person used to be. I went back to that old garage in San Jose, the one from the red folder. It was a dilapidated wreck, overgrown with ivy and forgotten by time. I opened into the workspace where Tech was born. It smelled like oil, old paper, and my childhood. I sat on the workbench. I pulled out the silver drive. The blue light was gone now. It was just a piece of metal again. As I sat there, my laptop now repaired chimed. It was a notification from the open-source repository I had created for the Phoenix code. I expected to see thousands of downloads from tech companies trying to steal the logic. But that's not what was happening. Instead, I saw a community Thousands of independent developers from around the world were collaborating. They weren't using the code to predict market crashes or target dissidents. They were using the predictive logic to map climate change patterns, to optimize food distribution in famine-struck regions, and to predict early-stage cancer cells. It was a tool. George had just been too blinded by greed to see its true purpose. Denzel walked into the garage, his footsteps soft on the concrete. He wasn't wearing a suit anymore. He looked like a man who had finally put down a heavy burden. "The board of the new Miller Systems is waiting for you, Patricia," he said. "They want to know what the first project is going to be." I looked at him. "The first project isn't a product, Denzel. It's a foundation. We're going to find every Patricia in this valley, every brilliant mind being hidden in a shadow, and we're going to give them a name, a seat, and a voice." I realized then that my revenge wasn't complete when George went to jail. It was complete when I stopped being afraid of the light. I spent so long being the invisible architect that I forgot the most important rule of building anything. The foundation has to be honest, or the whole thing will eventually fall. "There's one more thing," Denzel said, handing me a letter. "It's from the prison, George. He's asking for a meeting. He says he has a final secret, something that wasn't in the folder." I looked at the envelope. I could see George's handwriting, shaky, desperate, still trying to pull me back into his orbit. Still trying to be the visionary. I didn't open it. I walked over to the old metal trash can in the corner of the garage, dropped the letter inside, and struck a match. "He doesn't have any more secrets, Denzel," I said, watching the paper curl and turn to ash. "He's just a man who forgot that the code always has a master. And his time is up." 1 year later, I'm standing in the lobby of the Miller Center for Ethical AI. It's not a glass tower in Palo Alto. It's a repurposed warehouse in the heart of the community. There are no VIP war rooms here. The walls are glass, but they aren't meant to keep people out, they're meant to let the light in. George Vane is still in a federal cell. Every few months, Laura or Camilla sends a request for a deposition, trying to shave a few years off their sentences by offering up new information. I never respond. You see, the greatest revenge isn't seeing someone suffer. It's becoming someone they no longer have the power to affect. I realized then that the Sun Phoenix wasn't just about an algorithm that could predict the future. It was about a girl who could reclaim the past. Martins and Robert were stripped of their assets. The national security seizure they attempted was turned into a landmark case for digital privacy. The world changed because one assistant decided that being invisible was no longer an option. People ask me all the time, "Patricia, how did you know you would win? How did you know the logic bomb would work?" I look them in the eye and I tell them the truth. I didn't. There was a moment in that warehouse, when the FBI was rushing in and George was screaming, where I realized that even if I lost everything, even if I went to jail with them, the truth was already out. The moment you stop protecting a liar, they lose their gravity. They don't fall because of what you do. They fall because you stopped holding them up. For 6 years, I was the one holding George Vane together. I was his brilliance, his work ethic, and his conscience. When I stepped away, he didn't just lose a company. He lost the only thing that made him real. The world is full of Georges, people who take credit for the sun because they happen to wake up when it rose. But the world is also full of Patricias, the architects in the shadows, the geniuses who are told to be a sweetheart and get the water. If you are one of those people, listen to me. Your work is your power. Your silence is their currency. Stop paying them. I looked at the silver drive one last time before placing it in a glass display case in the lobby. It's not a weapon anymore. It's a reminder. Beside it, I placed a small plaque. It doesn't say, or a tech or CEO. It says, Patricia Miller, the voice. As I walked out of the building tonight, Denzel was waiting by the car. He's the head of our security now, real security, the kind that protects people, not secrets. He nodded to me, a silent acknowledgement of the journey we've taken. "Where to, Patricia?" he asked. I looked at the horizon. The sun was setting, but for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of the dark. "Everywhere," I said. "We have a lot of architects to find. The story is over, but the cycle only ends when you decide to break it. You've watched me burn down an empire to reclaim a name. You've seen what happens when the invisible finally stand up. If you're still sitting there, waiting for permission to own your brilliance, hit that subscribe button right now. If you don't, you're just giving another George your permission to steal your life." And for those of you who will leave this video without subscribing, go to the comments. Tell the world why you're okay with being furniture in someone else's house. I'll let the community decide if your excuses are worth the paper they're written on.